I now know that it's common for children left behind after suicide to hide their own feelings, to minimise the distress for their surviving and often deeply traumatised parent. But then, I'd never heard the word suicide before. I didn't know anyone whose parent had killed themselves, or anyone else for that matter. I didn't even know that it was a thing that people did. When I went back to school after the summer holidays, I felt completely different to everyone else, as if no one in the world had experienced what I had, that I wasn't worth staying alive for. I focused on doing well at school, something I could control when I could control little else in my life. I also played truant, finding myself in dangerous situations with other wounded souls. Secretly, I went to Sheffield's Central Library to try to understand what had happened, reading academic psychology books on suicide when I was just 10. Looking for clues as to why my dad had ended his own life when all my friends' dads were still there to see them grow up. Unsurprisingly, I didn't find my answers in those yellowing pages. I quickly learned that my dad's death by suicide wasn't to be spoken about. At home, at school, with friends, or even at the library, where the word was said in hushed tones, as if it would somehow harm others to merely hear it spoken. For decades I didn't speak about my dad or how he'd died. Not only did I not talk about him, nobody else did either. It was like not only had he gone, but also every memory or mention of him had been obliterated too. Taking the lead from those around me, at home and elsewhere, I accepted that as the norm and struggled to cling on to fading memories of my dad in silence. The truth is, I felt a tangible knot in my stomach every time I dared to ask my mum anything about the man with whom she'd brought me into the world. As an adult, I felt closest to my dad through our shared connection to the sea. He really was one of life's true characters. Anyone who met him never forgot him. He'd served a stint in the Merchant Navy long before I was born, and we spent summer holidays as a family on our 28-foot sailing boat, Algepug, first on the River Humber and then in the Mediterranean. Then he bought a bigger yacht for us to venture further afield, but Island Girl remained an unfinished project. She was already covered in weeds in our field in Sheffield, hundreds of miles from the sea, when he died, taking his dream of our world voyage with him. Back off Ventnor, I know I've got a tough slog ahead until sunrise, with the full force of the Channel against me, and that realisation weighs heavy. I pull the water with everything I've got, but I still go backwards. I close my eyes and I drift off, no longer able to fight the overwhelming urge. I'm jarred back to the here and now by the sound of a shrill whistle. "You're swimming straight at the boat," someone yells, knowing a single touch could invalidate my attempt. I try to focus on keeping my eyes open as I swim, but I drift off again, unable to resist the pull of oblivion. With the benefit of almost 4 decades of hindsight, I've realised just how profound the impact of my dad's suicide has been, both on my own life and the lives of those around me. I've carried the heavy burden of not being able to voice the relief I felt, a natural response to being free from fear, yet still something hard to share. I've battled severe bouts of depression and anxiety, struggled to form healthy relationships, and numbed out the pain and shame of the unspoken with substances, all-consuming work, and endurance sport. I've put myself in harm's way both in and out of the water. Research shows that I'm not alone, as children left behind after suicide display high rates of risk-taking behaviour, problem substance use and self-harm. I've come to realise that those self-inflicted harms can take many forms. It's often seen as aspirational when I'm setting a swimming record in the process, but they all have a lack of self-care at their core. Although there's been a degree of destigmatisation around some mental health issues, there remains a persistent taboo around a person with children ending their own life. Our failure to talk about parental suicide doesn't stop it happening, and we know that across the country each year, countless thousands of children are left, like me, to cope with the lifelong impact of a parent taking their own life. By the way, I said countless children, not as a metaphor, but because we're literally countless. Nobody counts us, both a byproduct of the prevailing stigma we face and a barrier to doing something about it. Back in the water, dawn arrives, and with it, the tide finally turns, sweeping me towards the finish. My mantra for those last agonising hours is, when you make it, you'll never have to swim another stroke ever again in your life. That keeps me going, and when I punch ride pier with sheer relief, almost breaking my hand, I make it into history as one of just 4 people to have swum non-stop around the Isle of Wight. Out of the water, the tide turned for me when I stopped seeing myself as a victim, as someone that something awful had happened to, and became someone with my own narrative of empowerment, who developed resilience and a will to succeed, not in spite of what I'd been through, but rather because of it. Earlier this year, I formed the Luna Foundation to transform the support for children and young people who lose a parent to suicide. Born out of my own experience and my international research, Luna is a vehicle for positive change. That change is badly needed because we face a 2-fold risk of hospitalisation with depression, and we're 3 times more likely to take our own lives. To improve those awful statistics, we first need to know what we're dealing with. We need to be countered so that policymakers will understand not only the severity, but also the scale of the need. I never want another child to feel as isolated as I did. I want others who have lost a parent to suicide to understand that they are not alone. And that means speaking out where there's suffocating silence, to share a story of hope and shine a light for those in the grip of the darkness.
Thanks, Anna. You make such a strong case for counting the children affected by parental suicide. I wonder whether we should continue to record that number as they become adults as well, given the lasting effects that you've outlined. That's it for Radio 4, but we'll be discussing that now over on the Forethought podcast. Do join us there.
Anna Wardley was the speaker in Forethought, presented by Ollie Mann and produced by Giles Edwards. And you can find the Forethought podcast now on BBC Sounds. And if you're suffering distress or despair and need support, including urgent support, a list of organisations that can help is available at bbc.co.uk/action line, or you can call for free to hear recorded information on 0800 066 066, 0800 066 066. In a couple of minutes, identical twins Chris and Zand van Tulleken will be reflecting on their relationship through the years and asking whether they can or should change the dynamic they have now.
The World Cup on BBC Sounds, with coverage of every single game on 5 Live.
Harry Kane whips the ball into the top corner.
Expert analysis and debate with some of the biggest names in football on the World Cup Daily Podcast.
What Gareth Southgate wants in players is that they can perform under the most intense pressure they will ever experience.
And a bit of fun in Match of the Day Top 10 with Gary Lineker.
Micah Richards is back along with Alan Shearer and myself for the biggest international football tournament on the planet.
Take the World Cup with you. Listen on BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. Environmental campaigners have criticised the government's approval of the UK's first new coal mine in 30 years. The site near Whitehaven in Cumbria will be used for producing steel, not for power generation. Supporters of the mine say it'll create around 500 jobs and will seek to be carbon neutral. The Shadow Secretary for Climate Change, Ed Miliband, called the claim dodgy accounting.
It's a terrible decision for our energy policy, for our climate policy, and it won't provide the jobs that people in Cumbria need. The idea that this is not terrible for climate change, this is the equivalent of putting 2 million extra cars on the road.
Travellers are being warned to expect cancellations and delays because of strikes. The RMT union has confirmed that rail workers will go ahead with 2 48-hour walkouts next week. Border Force staff have announced they're going on strike for 8 days between the 23rd of December and the New Year at airports including Gatwick, Heathrow, Glasgow, Manchester and Cardiff. A children's hospital in Belfast has cancelled all routine procedures due to the pressures caused by a rise in bacterial and viral infections. The Belfast Trust said it was facing significant pressures. A 5-year-old from Belfast died from an illness linked to the Strep A infection on Monday. The government has revealed more than 300 postcodes in England and Wales that will receive emergency cold weather payments. People on certain benefits will automatically get £25 credited to their bank account to help pay for heating. The payments are triggered when temperatures are set to reach 0 degrees or lower for at least a week. This year's Turner Prize has been awarded to the sculptor Veronica Ryan, who made the first permanent public artwork to honor the Windrush generation. For her memorial, Ryan placed giant sculptures of Caribbean fruits on a street in East London. At 66, she's the oldest person to win. BBC News.
In half an hour, we'll meet the man launching ITV's new streaming service. The media show is at 9:30. But now on Radio 4, Chris Van Tollecken is determined to improve his relationship with his twin brother, Zand. Over the next 8 weeks, they'll be asking whether people can change who they are. And tonight, they begin by reflecting on what their dynamic is as twins, what's it meant for their development, in a thorough examination with doctors Chris and Zand. Can I change?
What did people say about which one of us was which? Like, how did people tell the difference between us?
You've always been the funny, easygoing one, and I've always been the intense, serious, anxious one.
But that isn't how when people at a party are like, so how do I tell the difference between you two? You can't go like, I'm really neurotic and he's got a sense of humour. That's not a very helpful rule of thumb. Like, what do they tell you a joke then? They get you to like...
You'll be like, well, I'm the one at the party and Chris is at home working or something. Zand's my identical twin brother. It's a pretty rare relationship. Only around 4 per 1,000 people are identical twins. And being an identical twin is sometimes one of the best things in my life, but at other times, it's one of the worst. Our disagreements are intense and often really physical. It's a very different relationship to the one we have with our other brother, Jay. He's 2.5 years younger, and he lives in New York.
I was telling someone about how all the banisters in the house are broken because you used to pull me down the stairs and I'd break every banister on the way down.
We never argued that much with Jay. There was just a lot of violence. I don't think we ever seriously injured you particularly. I don't remember that.
The only thing was the dunking in the swimming pool.
Oh.
I definitely remember, thinking, this is
very funny.
I might drown.
And when we weren't beating Jay up, we simply ignored him.
I definitely wanted to hang out with both of you. I don't know if you remember, but I'd have nightmares and I'd come and sleep in a beanbag at the end of your bed and you guys would wake in the night to kick me out.